Vi pratar engelska på den här efter, because today we have an English speaking, a non-Swedish speaking guest coming from Radio Erena. So we'll hold this in English. Amanuel Ghirmai, you were one of the founders of Radio Erena, who is transmitting radio programs from Paris to Asmara. We have Ephrem Tewelde, who's one of the founders and initiators of Freedom Friday, which is an activist movement for Eritrea. Vanessa Berhe, who has been very active lately, trying to work for press freedom in Eritrea, not least for her uncle, who is in the campaign One Day Seyoum. And then we have Björn Tunbäck of Reporters Without Borders, who has also been in this line of activism for a long time. My name is Frigyes, and I've worked with press freedom and journalism about the media industry for about 15 years. First of all, I'd like to read the names of most of the journalists who were imprisoned 15 years ago this week. Kesete Debara. They work for several magazines, the imprisoned journalists. I will read their names. Dawit Isaak, you know his name. Seyoum Yusuf Muhammad Ali, Matteus Habteab, Medhani Haile, Temeske Gebresayes, Emwer Al-Srat, Fesehaya Johannes. During about a week between the 18th and the 23rd of September 2001, the Eritrean government struck hard against the newly founded press industry in Eritrea. The country was founded in 1991, and in the 90s it quickly flourished a number of magazines and newspapers. And in this very week, after September 11th in the United States, the government and the Eritrean government took its chance to strike out all free press in the country. And the journalists, about a dozen of them in the first strike, were imprisoned and were never sent to trial at all. No trial, no judgment, no sentences at all. And they haven't really been released since. Dawit Isaak, we know a little about him. We will talk about that later. But there are so many others. And Vanessa, your uncle, can you tell me about him? What do you know? What is the last thing you know about Seyoum?
So my uncle was imprisoned 2 days before Dawit Isaak in 2001, and the only thing we know today is that he is imprisoned, because there was never trial, there was never an official arrest. He was just taken from his home and put first in the prison in the capital city, and then after a hunger strike, he was transferred to another prison. So we haven't gotten any official information from any.
Do you know if he's alive at all?
No.
Do you know in what prison he is?
Well, according to sources that have come out, but not according to any official sources.
Okay. I know. We have also heard about the former prison officer or the chief of Arrangör prison has just left the country, he could leave some more information about the prisoners, but so far nothing has happened as far as I know. I would ask you, Björn, some people say to me when I say we're going to have a manifestation for Dawit Isaak, I'm so tired of Dawit Isaak. They only talk about him all the time. And why do you keep repeating his name? There's so many others being imprisoned in Eritrea and so many human rights abuses. Why should we bother particularly about him?
Well, no single human being's life is more worth than the life of another, of course. On the other hand, it took several years, even in Sweden, to get the name of Dawit Isaak known. Yet he's a Swedish citizen, so he would be of special concern here. And that took so long. We are mentioning all the others, but people don't hear it. Vanessa, she's made a marvelous job for her uncle, making his name sort of known here, not as much as Dawit. But then you have all the others, and you have the whole system as such. And we have to work for him predominantly because we can defend him as a Swedish citizen. So we have legal means, we have political means in his case, which we have to push as hard as we can. We have to use this. I mean, it's an advantage for us because we can speak on his behalf. The others, we can speak on their behalf too. We do. But we have an extra pleasure, an extra leverage when it comes to him because he's Swedish.
Okay, right. Amanuel, can I ask you something about the Committee to Protect Journalists says it's about 17 journalists in prison today in Eritrea.
Yeah.
Do you think is that the right number? Or
The number sometimes goes up and sometimes goes down because as I have witnessed things back in Eritrea when I was there, from time to time so many journalists went to prison and nobody reported about them, and at times they were released and nobody reported about them. So the number sometimes goes up to 35. The last number I remember. And, yeah, so the number goes up and goes down from time to time.
Why does Isaias has to imprison journalists? I mean, there's no press freedom in the country, so why does he bother? I mean,
well, most journalists back in Eritrea are now working for the state because, as there is no any private or independent media inside Eritrea. So the government thinks that some of the journalists have the potential to still connect with the outside media. So from time to time, like for example, I remember in 2006, they just come security officers to our offices, and they just checked our email accounts if we have connection to the external world. So that's what I think. From time to time, they arrest some journalists and check if they are connecting to other.
The interesting thing is, because I was in Eritrea last May 2015, and when I looked over Asmara, standing on one of the hills, on the northern hills, you could see a lot of satellite dishes on the roofs, even on poor people's homes. Not only like the posh houses, but also poor people's homes had satellite dishes. Apparently, they can get information, television channels like CNN or BBC or whatnot. How do you explain that? That there is some kind of press?
Yeah, you can say that. But if you put into account the number of illiteracy inside Eritrea, how many people do you think they can follow BBC in English or Al Jazeera in Arabic language? If you know the history of media inside Eritrea, radio is the most important, the most effective media inside Eritrea. And the government mainly focused on radio. And the government jammed so many radio stations. I remember one from South Africa and one from Ethiopia. They were shortwave radios. And the government was focusing on jamming these radios because the Eritrean public has the legacy of following radio stations.
Okay, yeah. I understand. Ephrem, can I ask you? You've been an activist here. You've been directing activism in Eritrea. What is the situation now of press freedom as far as you can see it?
Well, we at Al Baharnet have underground newspaper or magazine in Eritrea. Otherwise, it's still not allowed. I sometimes made calls to the government journalists there, and I give them information, but none of them would obviously play it. But our way is to do it underground newspaper. But the freedom of press, still Radio Erena has been jammed a few times previously, for example. It's still low. But we try on our way, even reminding the people about journalists. Like now we have a campaign about Frigyes Joshua. We are posting papers on the streets and making robocalls to remind people because the struggle is about between power and forgetting. So we try to remind them.
That must be immensely dangerous. I mean, posting, because if people see you, they will nick you directly, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, most of our members there, they do it at night. Some of them pretend to be homeless people, stay out at night, and then post the pictures and disappear.
How big is your network of people?
I don't think I can disclose how big it is, but we are strong enough to penetrate the regime and to know many things about what's happening in the country.
Is it important to have paper, or could you go through the internet more and more, or how do you view the difference between paper activism and internet activism?
The internet activism is mostly directed at the diaspora public, in the diaspora Eritreans. We are actually basically a link between the opposition that has existed outside Eritrea for some time, and then the opposition inside Eritrea, trying to link them. So the internet activism doesn't really work in Eritrea because internet cafes, last week we published a newspaper, an article or news where they started going or patrolling the internet cafes, trying to find people what they are reading, and few people were actually arrested. So that's why we choose the paper media and where they cannot easily track people. And telephone calls, obviously. We make thousands of calls every week through automated machines and even personal calls.
Interesting. Amanuel, tell me, you sent from Paris, you have your activity directed from Paris. The last year, what has been the development during the last year? Can you explain a little?
Well, the main objective of the radio from the start was to break the silence inside Eritrea, because the Eritreans were a little bit paranoid to speak to medias. From what I remember back inside Eritrea, nobody is there enough to speak for any journalist. And our objective was to break the silence, so in the last year, we achieved that so many Eritreans are publicly speaking, calling to Radio Erena, and dare enough to give comments or criticize or support the regime through the radio. So we finally said that at least the objective is done for the past year.
Okay. What do you think about Dawit Isaak? Maybe you heard the information coming out from the government of Eritrea, and they say that he's actually alive, and we're actually inching towards his a situation where he could be freed. What do you give us for that?
Well, for this, there's a simple answer, I guess. Where is the proof of life? Without a proof of life, you cannot say that somebody is alive or dead. You cannot comment. And to just prove that, we have also contacted the former Minister of Information, who is now in exile in Australia, and he even cannot confirm about this. So it's up to the government to confirm that, to show proof of life if he's alive or not.
And what do you think? Oh, we can only guess, you mean?
Well, it's just, we have sources like, saying that, okay, Mr. This is in hospital, Dawit Isaak was hospitalized and then returned back to the prison again, Mr. So is dead. We have such unconfirmed, so many information. But this cannot be an official announcement or to tell that Dawit Isaak is alive. We cannot say that. Where is the proof of life?
What do you think, Vanessa? Why is your uncle's case important for more than you yourself and your family, that is?
So when I started working for my uncle's case and started the organization, it was very much a reaction towards everything I grew up with in Sweden. Because I've traveled, I've lived in different countries, and there people don't even know Eritrea exists, but at least in Sweden people know about Dawit Isaak. And for me it was strange that they only knew about one person, not because his case wasn't important, but because it didn't reflect the situation in Eritrea. So a lot of people that I met in Sweden think that only one person is imprisoned and are very confused when I tell them that there are more people that are imprisoned. And for me, that's the most important information that they need to have, regardless if it's through my uncle's story, through Dawit Isaak's story, or through any one of the other journalists' stories. That there are more, and that this is a systematic oppression that is going on, that has been going on since 2001, and it's still going on now. As he was talking about, they're raiding journalists, they're raiding internet cafeterias, they're controlling the internet. It's a systematic issue that begins and ends with the government. So it's not simply one Swedish journalist. It's thousands and thousands of human beings who have been imprisoned. And with that being said, I think Sweden has a responsibility to fight for the Swedish citizen. But I feel that the Swedish citizens and Swedish organizations should focus on the bigger issue, should focus on the national service program, should focus on all the different freedom of oppressions that are being oppressed right now, because they are directly linked to my uncle's case and to Dawit Isaak's case.
Okay. So what can we say about the future? What are the options for change? Maybe I should ask you first, Amanuel, because the EU has given quite a hefty support to the Eritrean government during the last years because they don't want another failed state on the Horn of Africa. We don't want another Somalia, so better give Isaias some money and let him keep some stability there. I think that's a good motivation why the EU wants to give the government some support. But I guess that's not so good for the outlooks for democracy. What do you think is going to be the outcome of the future, the next 2 years?
Well, the West has interest in the region, of course, so they prioritize their national interest. They don't want to see a failed state in the Red Sea, because as you mentioned it, yes, there is a problem in Somalia, and if there is also a problem in Eritrea.
Yemen.
Yes, Yemen, all the region is a problem. And Sudan is not friendly with the West. And if something happens in Djibouti because of Eritrea also, it would be a mess in the Red Sea, which is a threat of market for the world. Yes, it's true, we understand that. So when Europe is dealing with the Eritrean government, they see it from this point of view, and then comes the issue of human rights in the country. But for us, we first believe that, change should come from inside. And we try our best, as I told you earlier. At least the public should be aware and try to break the silence and talk. And then they can challenge. And from a Western point of view, when it comes supporting the government, they have a different point of view. They differ on different subjects. But when it comes, like, for example, to Sweden, they didn't oppose when the European Union gave 200 million development aid to the regime. On the other side, they were making a silent diplomacy with the government.
But do you think it's bad? What should Sweden do?
Well, at least, they should do more pressure on the regime. At least they should oppose what's been done by the UN Security Council, the sanction. They should work on it. Why let the regime collect illegal 2% tax inside their territory?
Oh.
Why let officials travel freely?
Do you agree, Ephrem?
Yeah, I think we have to look back and analyze what are some of the reasons that has made the current regime dictator. It was because the previously during the struggle, nobody cared, and they say, where were you when we were bombed with cluster bombs, when our cities vanished, when our villages vanished? And the opposition now, a few years from now, is going to say the same thing. Where were you when we were suffering as Eritreans? Because whether the West supports, Sweden supports or not, freedom is coming, and I can guarantee you that. But Sweden can play a positive role, because appeasing the dictator would never work, because the only reason the dictator is speaking openly now is because of the press that was created due to Commission of Inquiry, where 16,000 people for the first time in Eritrean history went out in Geneva. New immigrants, people who were fearful previously, went out and demonstrated against the regime, and sanctions were coming. So he called the ambassador in France, arrange me a speech, let me tell them Dawit is alive, so that Sweden will dance after my game. And that's what's happening. And the West, I think, would definitely regret what is happening now.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming up here, and thank you all for attending this seminar.